Our series is based off of a phrase, a sentence that God spoke in the book of Revelation. He was revealing himself to John and telling him about how the world works and how the future is going to be. And he made this statement, God did. He said, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. And so last week we heard from Greg Williams, and Greg talked about legacy. And this week you're going to hear from Jen and Terry, and it's pretty cool because we're going to hit on a couple different areas. We're going to talk a little bit about relationship, Terry's relationship with Gary. We're going to talk about Jen and Terry's relationship as you guys went through the grief of losing Terry, some of the tension that was there. And so probably be some tears. You guys might cry too. So yeah, I was going to say there's going to be tears. One of the things that I love about Terry is, with Terry, she's honest and she's passionate. And so this could be the most glorious moment or the most beautiful train wreck you've ever seen. And so I don't know what's going to happen, but I would grab your popcorn
Hashtag my life.
Right. Jen's like, that's my whole testimony right there. So, but let's do a quick intro and then we'll kind of jump in and we'll talk about a couple of these key stories. So education, Terry, what was your education? What did you study, do?
My education, I graduated.
So you want that real up close and point it to them. There you go. Yeah, awesome.
All right. I graduated Capitol Hill High School in 1962.
Okay.
I turned, that was May of 62. I turned 18 in August of 62. Gary turned 20 of August of 62. And we got married in August of 62.
Okay.
Awesome. So that started my education,
and then,
real life education.
And then, so throughout your life, stay-at-home mom, what all have you done? Is that the primary? Is that?
As far as education, yes. At that time, I was called a housewife, and I was proud of that title. And now I'm a homemaker and
domestic engineer. It changed.
No,
so, yeah.
I'll call homemaker. I can't go that far.
You're not going.
No, but anyway, I love my life as being a homemaker, and I grew up wanting to get married and have kids, and thank God that worked out really good. Oh, sorry.
You're good. You're good.
That worked out really good. God's plan worked out really good for my life.
It does oftentimes.
Yeah.
So that's good. Jen, how about you? Education, job, that kind of stuff?
I went to Tuttle High School, and from there I went to OSU for 2 years. And after my second year in college, Jeff and I got married, and I transferred to Northwestern in Northwest Oklahoma in Alva, and graduated from there. And
in what? What was your degree?
I was certified in both elementary and early childhood education.
Oh, cool. And so what do you do now?
I am a teacher, and I am in about my 25th year. Some of those were in more of a church setting, but when my older kids were little, I took about 5 years off and stayed home and did a Mother's Day Out program at our church in Oklahoma City. And other than that, I've been in public school.
Awesome. And so real quick, how many kids, how many grandkids, how many kids, how many grandkids?
Well, we have 3 kids, Jamie, Jeff, and Jennifer, 9 grandchildren, and I won't try to name all of those, and 6, believe it or not, 6 great-grandchildren.
That's awesome.
That is way awesome.
All right.
Jeff and I have 5 kids.
I love the pause.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah,
Hang on.
there is a lot of them. And 2 of them are married and have brought great additions to our family that I call my kids also.
Mm-hmm.
We do have 1 grandbaby, and it's pretty awesome. My dad always said if he could have had grandkids first, he would have never had kids. So it's pretty good.
All right, well, let's do some basic questions before we jump into your story. Favorite band?
Well, Platters, the 50s and 60s music.
Platters?
The Platters.
Okay, the Platters. Anybody?
Some of you, yeah.
Shout out for the Platters?
Yeah.
All right, what's up? All right.
And Gary still loved to listen to the Platters music. And if he ever really got into the Platters, he would come over to my chair and stick his hand out. Gary was not a dancer or anything like that, but he would stick his hand out, and I would get up, and we'd dance around in our little circle in our living room to the
That's sweet. To the Platters.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna have to listen to the Platters. All right.
It's good music.
What do you got, Jen?
Probably in high school, I was Prince, Boston, kind of all over the place.
What's up?
Now I have a favorite group that I listen to called Black Violin, and it's incredible music, two young black men, and they're incredible. They kind of combine classic with new sounds, and it's really cool.
Nice.
So,
Do you have to
or
check that out? Like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
a word.
they're
Okay,
on Spotify.
check
Yep.
that out. Sport or activity in high school? What was your jam? What you got, Terry?
Nothing.
Nothing. So
Nothing.
did you do anything like?
No extracurricular activities at school. The way I was raised, it was our little circle of life. I didn't go to slumber parties and stuff like that. It was just our little circle of life, our grandparents and stuff
Okay.
like that.
Cool. What about you, Jen?
My jam in high school was FFA,
Which
is Future Farmers of America.
Gotcha.
I think they're called something different now. I don't even know, but I showed pigs and gave speeches.
So hang on. So
and-
because I'm not a country person, you
Uh-huh.
show pigs.
yeah,
You like
you
it's
do.
a pig,
You can,
and
it's
that's a
pig.
thing. Like
it is
I mean,
a thing.
can you be like a varsity? Here's a pig.
You
Like,
can
okay.
be. Yeah.
Show him how it's done, Jen.
No, not today.
I'm gonna have to see now.
Yeah.
Black violins and people showing pigs. Like
Mhm.
my YouTube search history is gonna be a mess. But
Yeah.
so you
Yeah.
showed pigs
I showed
professionally or
pigs.
varsity or whatever. Yeah.
Whatever,
Did you get a
that way,
letter
yeah.
jacket? Like I've got so
No,
many
no,
questions.
no.
Okay.
We can talk about
So,
it later.
Yeah,
but
I'm,
no.
I just with a P on it or something. I don't know. Yeah, like you get a little pig pin. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I did have an FFA jacket, but I didn't have a varsity jacket. So,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the blue and gold.
I just see. I don't even want to keep going with the interview now. I'm like showing pigs like this. All right. How about treat? What's your favorite candy bar or treat?
And my favorite treat is Bluebell ice cream.
Ooh,
I love me some Bluebell
got
ice
a couple
cream.
people out there. They won't say
Yeah.
amen to Jesus, but the Bluebell, they were like, "What's up, Holla?"
I do want to say this. When Darcy was little, Gary and I kept her before she started school, and so that was our treat. We loved us some Bluebell ice
All right,
cream.
What's your treat?
I would say bluebell also. Yeah.
All right. How about something funny about the other person?
This
Like-
has been hard. This has been the hardest thing, I think.
Is something funny about Terry?
It's
I was like,
all
Terry's
funny.
a riot. I was,
She's-
oh my goodness.
Well, the question was, what's something funny that everybody doesn't know?
Right.
Everybody knows everything about Terry. So that's what made it hard.
So I'm going to tell one. So when I was interviewing here, we stayed at Terry's house, and the
I
first
knew
story
this was gonna come
first
up.
story she tells me about, sometimes she walked out naked in the middle of the house, and I'm going, Terry.
That's true. That's true. That is true.
I think it was Saturday. We got in Friday night, and Saturday she's like, "Hey, Mike, by the way, sometimes I walk naked," and I was like, "All right, so we're coming to Tuttle now because they're our kind of people." So you.
I'll go on with my funny story about Mom. Sometimes when you go out to eat with her, she's like, "Oh no, I'm not hungry." Well, the minute you get your plate, then she's suddenly hungry. And so she's always that. I've heard a phrase where guys are supposed to order extra fries. They're called the girlfriend fries.
Uh-huh.
You have to order the Mimi fries
The Mimi
because
fries.
she wants something but just doesn't think about it. And then you'll know she thinks it's good when she goes, and this can be at your house even.
All right, that's good. All right, you get to talk about Jen now. What's something funny about Jen?
I think the funniest thing about Jennifer is we have 3 kids. Jamie is just like me. Jeff is just like Gary. And Gary and I are complete opposites. And then I tell everybody, and Jennifer's just the perfect mix of the two of us. And she says, "Mom, you and Dad in one body is not pretty."
That's awesome.
It's an internal struggle. all
How
the
about
time.
this? What's something amazing about the other person that someone may not know? Something that you just like, hey, you got to know this about my mom. You got to know this about my daughter.
You want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. I think something amazing about you is that the way you can look at me, it's okay. The way you love people. And I mean, I think I love people, but I don't love people like you love people. And I think that's amazing about you. And that's something that I'm sure a lot of you have experienced is just there's something about the way my mom just can recklessly love people.
Yeah.
The thing that amazes me about you is that you are a godly woman, and you see it in the way she treats her spouse, her children, other people. Everything about Jennifer's life is just automatically considered, what does God say? What does God want me to do? And you've been that way for a long, long time. I try to live that now. I wish I had known at a young age like you did to live a godly life.
I think we should celebrate that. That's pretty cool, isn't it? I mean, that's a pretty cool thing for both of you guys. So your guys' story is big, and there's a lot of stuff to it. So we're just going to kind of pop in on some other moments. I'd encourage you guys, if you have questions, grab Jen, grab Terry, just say, hey, let's get some coffee, let's talk about it. But I want to hit on a couple things. So one of the things that came up as we talked was you guys were talking about Gary, and you talked about, I mean, here's this powerful man. Like, he walked in the room and people knew that Gary was present. Very, very conscientious, right? Like, I mean, I think the statement you guys said was he was always right. Like, not like in a haughty way, but like he was just right. I mean, the idea of I mow my lawn and I pay my bills and I pay my taxes, and like, I mean, he was a very dutiful man. But you guys talk about this moment where he's this right guy that's been in church for a long, long time, and the preacher gets up and he preaches on forgiveness. And something was going on in your dad. And I'll tell the story in essence to kind of just protect some of the people in your guys' family. But you guys had a family member that had kind of taken advantage of some other family members. Your dad talked about, I hate him, like I'm not okay with him. I hate him. But as the preacher preaches, this right man goes, I'm not living righteously, and decides, hey, before we go, you go home, I'm going over to so-and-so's house and I'm going to apologize to him because I don't get to not forgive and be forgiven. And this phrase you used, Jen, I thought was really cool. You said that was the day my dad talks about going from being right to being righteous. That he went from like, I follow all the rules to, no, I get it now. And so I'd love it, maybe, Jen, just for a minute. That's a pretty big deal. What's it like to see your dad go from this really good churched guy to, man, I'm going to go ask for forgiveness from someone who doesn't even know that I'm mad at him? And I mean, what does that do to you? How does that impact you?
Well, according to my dad, that would be the day he became a Christian rather than coming to church.
Right.
That would be the day that he became a Christian, that he started living just as a teacher. We always want the application of life. And obviously when people come to church, we want them to leave and apply the things. Michael said many times, if, we don't want you to feel guilty, we want you to do something. And that was the day that Dad decided it was the day to do something.
Yeah. And
that really began just a transformation in him. That was just the moment that began it. So I was still living at home. My brothers were out of the house at that time. And so I got to live the last few years of my high school and a couple of years into college in the home with Dad, becoming more like Jesus, honestly. Yeah.
So what was that like? Your husband he has this transformation, right? Because I know Nancy will say there's been times in life where I've changed and she's like, okay, we've been married all this time and now you're different, and how weird that is. But I mean, here's your husband. He goes from, straight-laced and right to going, oh man, there's this forgiveness thing I have to have. What did you notice in Gary in that change?
Well, when Gary and I talked about it, he said it was like a weight lifted off his shoulders.
Yeah.
That's how desperately he hated that man. But he realized, I could see the realization in him, just living for God, not what Gary thought was right. Because Gary always wanted to do the right thing.
Right. But isn't it amazing that you could physically see the difference that forgiveness can have and the impact that even that adjustment from follow the rules to follow Jesus? I mean, there is a physical difference you see in people.
It really was a difference in him. You could just see him becoming a more gentle man.
Right.
Gary was always a real loving man, but from our time, little boys weren't allowed to show that. So It was very hard for Gary to show any emotion.
Yeah.
But you could just see him become a more gentle, kinder man.
When you said, Jen, and I want to kind of go to this, you said you saw another transition in him. And I want you to talk about it, but the concept was he went from loving those he knew and trusted to beginning to love people he didn't know and knew he couldn't trust. Talk about that, because that's a massive shift.
Yeah, I don't even remember how Mom and Dad got involved in doing the cookie ministry with Bethany First Baptist ?
Bethany Baptist Church,
Okay.
homeless ministry.
And that was when Dad began to love people that at one time he would have had bad feelings for, homeless people, get a job. I mean,
right, because his attitude was there's a right and a wrong, and you must be doing something wrong or it'd be going right for you. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You've made decisions that something wrong has happened in your life.
Right.
And I just saw this incredible transition in him learning to love people that didn't love him and were really, his interaction was with them was they wanted something from him. He had food, he was with people who had food, who had blankets, who had clothes, things like that, where in the past it would have been more, don't love me just because I can give you something.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But that's really when my dad began to love people that A, he did not know, and B, that he knew he probably couldn't trust.
Which is
crazy.
That's a big step.
Yeah, there were a couple Thanksgivings that he and Mom drove downtown and got their friends and brought them to their house for Thanksgiving dinner.
When you had talked about, and I thought this was cool, you said, it was the exposure to being with those people that changed his heart. Because I think, one of the things in Christianity, I think we can have this formed love. Well, I'm supposed to love somebody who's in another country. I'm supposed to love the homeless, so I will. But for your dad, actually going to be near those people is what caused him to truly love those people.
Absolutely. And Dad would even talk about later in life that, that one decision away, we're all one decision away from being in a financial ruin, being, on drugs, just going down the wrong path. I mean, any of us have that potential to head down a path that's going to lead us to a dark place.
Yeah.
And he just happened, I guess in a lot of ways, he began to live in a more graceful, merciful way.
Right. But that was later in life too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's one of the things
he
about
was late 60s.
That's one of the things about
60s.
Gary's story that amazes me.
Yeah.
Is, I think when we're younger, we expect that from younger people, that they're going to have this response and this movement. But I think we forget when you're 55, 60, 65, and you submit to Christ in those kind of ways, that's a beautiful gift. I mean, it's hard to do later in life, but your dad's story is, look, if I see Jesus, I'm going to walk towards him, and I don't care how long I've been doing what I've been doing. Right. I'm changing to and that doesn't mean he became this gentle, soft,
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. And that doesn't mean, that there weren't moments that he was still hard ass. I mean, he was.
That's in the Bible, so you can So
maybe those two words not together,
but hard and ass are in, so it's good.
But he was. I mean, there were moments, but it was just like any of us. It's a transformation. It's not. God's not a magician. He just doesn't poof us into something.
Which I think is huge, though, right? Because I know you guys would agree with this. I think so many Christians nowadays are superstitious in that they're waiting for God to do magic. Mm-hmm. God transforms. Right. God does the miraculous. God doesn't do the magical.
Usually difficult situations.
Absolutely.
Or situations that are outside something you want.
Yeah.
So
I want to focus on this too, Terry, because I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit. We talked about your marriage, and what I loved about it is you're very honest, right? You're like, you and Gary were very different. And I think the way that we were talking about it is Gary was black and white and straight-laced and polished shoes, and you're tie-dye neon and spring break and like hippie all over. And you two find each other, you fall in love, and you had this tremendous love for each other, but it was not easy, right? I mean, real quick, just because you love someone doesn't mean it's going to be all great, right?
Our life was great. It really, really was great, especially looking back on it. But sometimes it was very difficult.
Yeah.
And I think the difficulty was we were so different, but didn't know we were different. We thought we were exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because we had goals out here. Here's how Gary got to his goal. Thank you. Here's how I got to Argo.
It reminds me of the Family Circus where the little boy is going to his neighbor's house and he like circles the whole neighborhood 18 times.
And that was great and charming and fun and hard.
Right. So it ended up, you guys got into some fights at times, right?
We got into some
I,
ugly. I just tried to rein this in. It got pretty ugly a couple of times. In fact, one time I remember we were having a knockdown, drag out, screaming and cussing and fighting and all but coming to blows, and didn't realize our children were standing in the hall listening and seeing all of that and crying, thinking, oh my gosh, Mom and Dad are going to get a divorce.
Heck, I thought they was going to kill each other.
Yeah, it is funny though, right? Because you make this great distinction. We were different, didn't know we were different, so we start fighting, not thinking about the kids are watching. And you talked about there were times, didn't you, thinking like this is not gonna.
It's because everything would be running along real smooth, and then we didn't fight smooth.
Yeah, learning to fight. See, that's one of the things that is really cool. Is I love about your stories. You guys learned how to fight. You didn't take fighting out of your repertoire, right? Because I know couples who will say, we've been married 10 years and we've never fought. And I'm like, one of you is lying or you're about to end this thing, man. Because, I mean, when you care passionately, you do fight. It's about learning how to fight better, right?
Well, thank God the reason we learned to fight better is because thanks to Jennifer, I read 5 Love Languages.
Yeah.
And that book I underlined and colored, and I couldn't wait for Gary to read it. And he said, I don't need some kind of psychiatrist telling me how I feel. And so that's how different. See, that just spoke to me.
Yeah.
But that changed my life is because I could see Gary through God's eyes.
Yeah.
Not what I wanted him to be, not what I expected him to be, and frustrated all the time because he was straight and black and white.
Because he was Gary.
Yes.
One of my favorite stories you guys told though was you and Gary got into a fight one day, and Jen, you were older, had kids. You want to tell that because that's such a beautiful story.
We were in, I think, Odessa, Texas, of all places, and that's a great place to fight, I'm sure, because it's anyway. So we were in the van, and I don't remember if I'm pretty sure I had all 3 of our older kids, and they were little, and my mom and dad were in the front of their van in the 2 front seats, and I was in the middle, and my kids were all there with us. And oh man, they were just going at it. And I finally just said, like I'm the mom, that's enough. You 2 stop it right now. We are done with this. You are not going to fight like this in front of my kids. And Dad was mad. But they stopped fighting.
I love it because you have the like, I will pull this man over right now.
I mean, yeah. Oh, he was about to pull it over, I'm afraid. But
that's great.
Yeah, they were just,
It was over directions.
Yeah.
I said, hello.
I love that you remember it. You know exactly what it was about.
Because now I look back on how ridiculous that was.
What I love, though, when we were talking about this part of your guys' life, and I love that you'll share it, right? Because I think it's important that we don't give the picture that a Christian marriage doesn't have conflict. Every good marriage has conflict, and you're going to have fights and stuff. But you guys made this transition from when hearing your story from we fought with each other to we fought for each other. And there really was this adjustment where you guys were like, you need to see it from my point of view. And then you read this book and you go, oh, I want to understand where you're coming from, which I think is a really sweet way, right? Because not a lot changes except for your perspective. And that can change the fight dynamically.
How that changed me so much is I saw Gary is like he is because that's the way God made him
and that's
and
a
me.
Good thing, right?
Oh, that saved my life. That's really that made the rest of our marriage, even though some disagreements, it made it more pleasant. It made it just easier life because I could see God made him the way he is for God's purpose. And me, well, Gary was the
Oh,
business.
you have to finish it. And you, the way he made you on God's purpose, you don't get to trail that one off.
Okay, well, and God made me how I am because we balanced each other out.
Yeah.
Gary was the business, I was the fun.
Yeah. So you guys wear a mullet. That's awesome.
There you,
So,
there you
well,
go. There
See,
you
some
go.
of them are like, what is he even talking about? But they'll get it later. So no, I love that though, that idea of allowing the person's personality to be, hey, that's part of God's design. Now, I mean, not our sins and our bad habits, but I think sometimes nowadays we're so busy trying to make everybody the same that we forget, look, if you're bold, be bold. I know we were talking, Jen, and we'll talk about this a little later. You know, as a lady in our culture, you're very bold and sometimes in the church, it's, oh, don't be that. That's, you know, guys are bold and women are quiet. But if God made you courageous, if he made you a leader, if he made you bold, he did that on purpose. And I love in your family, without making exception for sin, you guys go, be who God made us to be. Like, that's okay. You didn't try to make Gary gentle. He didn't try to make you kind of straight-laced and, you know, detailed.
After that, no, we
After
quit
that,
trying.
yes, that's right. So at
After
first,
that,
maybe,
we quit
so.
trying to change each other. It just made it easier for us, and I learned to really appreciate and respect why Gary was the way he was. And hey, that business worked really good for me, and my fun worked really good for him.
So let's do this. I want to talk a little bit about Gary's passing. So he gets sick. So he's sick for a little while. They find out he's got encephalitis, and that's starting to really kind of mess. It's a brain infection, right? Starting to really mess with some of his cognitive abilities, his memories. One of the sweetest things that I heard you guys say, one of the most, and this will stay with me till the day I die. You talk about how he would struggle, and you guys had to come to grips with he wasn't giving us a hard time. He was having a hard time, which I think is one of the most powerful statements I've ever heard about people that are in kind of cognitive decline and struggle. But you guys talk about like one day Gary asking you, hey, where's my wife Terry? And you going, well, I'm right here. And then when that wasn't going to convince him, I think you said something like, well, she's out at the store. You know, you didn't fight him on it. You just went, okay.
And you just have to learn to adjust with that, because at first we didn't realize what was going on in his brain was just made him different. It just confused him.
Right.
And he looked right over at me, right in the eye, and said, where's Terry? And I said, what, honey? I'm right here. He said, no, not you, Terry. I want Terry, my wife. And I said, well, that's me, honey. I'm right here. And he said, no, you're Terry, my mom, not Terry, my wife. I was probably a little bossy by then. Maybe not. But anyway, Terry, my wife. And I said, oh, she went to the store. She'll be back in a little bit. He was satisfied with that. Right.
Well, and there was another time, right, when he's in the hospital and the Olympics are on TV. You mind telling that? Because I thought that was funny.
Yeah. I mean, and Mom was there with him, and he saw the Olympics on TV, and he thought that they were there. Mom and Dad travel a lot. I'm sure that he just had those memories of them traveling, and he thought that they were actually at the Olympics. And, you know, and Mom just, you know, went along with it. I think what was difficult about some of that is Dad was always so logical that you felt like, okay, if I use logic with him, it's going to trigger like, oh, yeah, we're not at the Olympics. We would never do that or whatever. But we had to learn that the logic wasn't necessarily there any longer, right. You know, and just be with him wherever he's at.
The grace you guys have in that, because I think we can get stuck in the middle of stuff like that and think about how it's impacting us. But to just go, he's not doing this to us. This is happening to him. And I think whether that's with a 2-year-old or whether someone in their 70s, to go, hey, this is occurring to them. That's huge, man. Yeah. I mean, I think that's big. So Gary gets sick. Eventually, Gary passes. And I do want to hit on this a little bit before we go to some of the takeaways. You guys ended in some tension. You two as a mom and daughter. You ended up having to be kind of the decision maker, which is big when you're trying to grieve the loss of your dad to go and decide all this other stuff.
Right. My brother Jeff had always kind of helped Mom and Dad with their finances, so thank God I didn't have to do that part of it. But just actually the day that my dad passed away, some of our family came to me and said, I don't know if you can see this, but But every time there's a decision that has to be made, everybody kind of looks at you. You're the decision maker. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not me. I'm the baby of the family. I don't want to do that. And they're like, but that's actually what's happening. So I kind of had to go into
The dad side came out in her.
yeah, this is definitely dad's side. But what was hard is I had the mom side in me. I wanted to grieve.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be comforted. And I found that I did that alone a lot.
Yeah.
I would go to the shower and cry in the shower because I felt like I had to be strong. And so I didn't probably do a very good job of being as vulnerable as I needed to be, because I didn't feel like that I got comforted a lot.
Yeah.
And that's no one's fault because I wasn't showing that I needed that.
I think it's a great reminder, though, Jen, for those of us when we go through grief and somebody is the executor of an estate, or maybe not even officially, but in that role, to understand they're putting their grief on hold to serve the family. Because my sister was the executor of my parents, and I remember at the time thinking like, wow, I mean, she's all about business, and and going, okay, she's doing that to serve our family, and she is withholding her grief right now, and grief kind of piles up pretty quickly if you don't express it.
Yeah, it does. And like I said, I would just usually escape to have moments where I could grieve.
Yeah. So you guys end up, I know I want to move to this moment. Your mom ends up moving a chair. No, this is a big deal, right? I know but so Gary had a chair that he sat in, and you were at a place where you're like, okay, I need to move it. It's time to kind of move. But when you came in, you were going, hey, too soon.
Yeah.
We talk about this idea that grief moves at different speeds, that it does not move at the same speed for everyone. And so you have this blow up, and there's this tension building. And then you guys did something, which was really, I love you guys for. You sat down. I think you said, let's deal with it, Jen. And Jen, something I know about you is you're like, we're getting to the heart of it. We're going to have a discussion. So talk a little bit about what it's like in the middle of grief to have a fight so that you can kind of get through it and love each other, and you can grieve and she can grieve.
And honestly, it lasted probably about a year, maybe a year and a half, this tension. And we would have moments where I felt like I was like holding that inside, but my mom would, she could feel. That's where, I am like my dad, like usually I'm kind of an open book. So she knew that there was that tension there, but kind of how that happened was my role changed in my mom's life a little bit. Just hearing her describe the relationship between she and dad, I came alongside and which we discussed early on, even before my dad passed away. She would say things like, you're going to have to provide me some guidance, some guardrails. And because she knows she's like this, but knows maybe she might need to be a little bit more like this. So she recognizes that about herself. And so that was kind of when my dad wasn't there, she would say, hey, what should I do about this or whatever, even before he'd passed away. So when dad passed away, that's kind of the role I stepped into in our relationship. Except, even though mom said, I need you to do this and I want you to do this for me, she also had a newfound freedom that she liked also.
Yeah, it's always interesting, right? Because it's that idea that I want help and I want my independence, and where those two things clash. I think in some ways it's parenting. Hey, how do I give independence?
I'm afraid we're there.
You're there. Well, but I do think there's that idea, give me input, but don't tell me what to do.
Right.
Help me out. And then in the midst of this, you're a daughter who needs to grieve, but you're also trying to now take on this new role of like, I'm kind of helping my mom in this way. One of the coolest things about your guys' story, though, is you guys ended up having a good, healthy fight. And you made a statement, Jen, that I thought was brilliant. I said, well, what gave you the ability to have that fight? And you said the relationship we had beforehand. Can you talk about that? Because that's significant. I think there's people nowadays who go, okay, so I'm going to go from here and I'm going to have the fight. Hey, if you don't invest in the relationship before the fight comes, the fight's messy.
Right.
If you invest in the relationship, it's different. Hit on that a little bit.
Well, like I said, my mom and I have always been very close. So that having that tension between us was not something that either of us anticipated first off.
Right.
So, there were multiple times when we would get together or when I would call and say, hey, I'm sorry for this or that. And likewise, I mean, there were times that she would call and just say, so in that year and a half, there were multiple times when we had to come to each other and just say, hey, let's work through this or whatever. But I think just because we weren't willing to give up our relationship, we weren't willing to not deal with the tension that was there. I'm, like you said before, I'm like, let's just name it, let's deal with it, let's talk about it, let's get it over with.
And Jen, I want to say this because I deeply appreciate about you. You and I have disagreed about a couple things over the time that I've been here, and what I've always loved is initially, you'll kind of come at it and like, hey, we're going to talk about it, and I'm always curious, like, okay, you want to yell at me or you want to talk about it? And what I've always found with you is well, that's okay, yeah. But after the yelling gets out, but there is this sincerity in you that goes, look, I care about resolving it.
Right.
And truth matters to you and reasons matter to you. But I love the courage that you have that you'll go, we're going to name the tension. And that's something you're really, really good at, is going, okay, I think this is the issue, but you do it really well. And I say that because I want to praise you in front of people. I think that's a gift God's given you that's good for our church, is that without becoming domineering, without becoming kind of like demanding, this is how it's going to be, you see it. And when you see it, you go, oh, this is what I think it is. And you have the courage to speak up. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
That's her daddy's side.
Yeah.
For sure.
The yelling side, would that be the you side, or how's that?
Oh, yeah, probably
Yeah.
me.
So.
If there's tears involved, it's going to be that side of me, of her.
Well, so let's do this. I want to kind of bring it to a close real quick, and then I want to give you guys both a chance to kind of say anything you want to. A couple of things that we wrote down, just as takeaways. Your head and your heart don't communicate well in grief. Like, give yourself a ton of grace, because when you're grieving, you're not always who you think you are. Those Snicker commercials. Yeah. It's like, you're not who you think you are. And give other people grace, because you go, well, I can't believe they're doing that. Look, they're hurting. Like I've said for a long time, we were created for the garden. God didn't create us for death. When death enters in, we're now in the one thing we were not created to experience. We're experiencing it. So there are no rules, and it is an absolute mess. You guys fought for each other, with each other, but that's because the relationship you'd invested in before. I think that's a massive takeaway is, hey, listen, tough times are always coming. Invest in the good times, have honest conversations in the good times so that you can stand up under the harder times. And then the name the tension thing was a big one that I love about you. But I want to read a psalm to you, just a real short part of it. And then I want to give both of you a chance to say anything you want to the congregation. Remember, filter, we're at church. Or maybe she was the one that cussed. You didn't even say naked or a cuss word. She's cussing up here. You got the bad rap. So you're the good one today.
That was obviously my mom coming out.
Yeah, what's up? All I know is, Terry, you get to walk off first service being like, what's up? So here's the passage that came to mind for you guys as I was praying and thinking about it. It comes from Psalm chapter 30, verses 11 and 12. And it just says, you turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and you clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing to you and not be silent. O Lord, my God, I will give you thanks forever. When I think of both of you, it is that idea that the grief was real. The grief is still real. It doesn't go away. But you've said, okay, but I'm not going to live in sackcloth. I am going to enjoy Jesus. I am going to love him, and I'm going to tell other people about him. Your thing to me when we were talking about all this is, I don't care what anyone hears, as long as they hear that God loves them. I love God, and I love them as well, which I think is beautiful. So you got 60 seconds. You can say anything you want. Terry, you get to go first. What do you got? I've got a clock right there, sister. I'm on you.
Okay.
So no, what do you think? You get anything you want to say to the people that are listening, and then Jen, you'll have your shot as well.
What I would like for people to understand is, even though you all are different from each other, it's really for God's purpose. It's for God to grow you together, not to make you butt heads with each other. And Gary is still such an important part of my life, is because we got married young, we grew old together, and that's part of how my grief is not sad to me anymore, because I've said 101 times, Gary would be so happy for me because I'm living the life that we live together. It's all us. Everything I do is us. And one morning I got up and he wasn't there, but I went in the bathroom. There you are. Everywhere I looked, well, my gosh, right out loud, I said, there you are. And I still say right now, here he is right here in this building with me, in my life with me. That's how I see God in my life. God comforting me in that I put you together till death do you part.
That's awesome. That's beautiful. Jen?
Okay. I think my takeaway, and this has been, I told you this morning, a little bit hard for me because it's like, what's the one thing that you want to say? And I think the Lord just woke me up this morning and kind of confirmed in me. And this is something that I've talked oftentimes with our kids about when they're having conflict, whether it's with one another or somebody else, is the person or people are always more important. They're always more important. They're more important than the lane that you're driving in, more than the parking space, more than you being right. They're more important than conflict. They're more important than it doesn't matter. The end is the person is always more important.
Yeah.
And that's just, and I think that that's probably just throughout this whole story, through this whole message is, that in all the relationships we've talked about, in the rightness of dad, he still had to learn that the person was more important.
Yeah.
And so that's probably my takeaway is bottom line, the person's the most important thing, not politics, not, it doesn't matter. The person is always the most important.
That's awesome.